Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan, you have 5 minutes, Deputy.
My question today at Leaders' Time was about values and the values underpinning our economic policies, and I made the point that there's a lack of a social policy component of economic policy, and also missing from economic policy are principles of social justice and human sympathy, and I think all of that is creating unacceptable levels of economic inequality, and that applies to people with disabilities. Research from the Centre for Economic and Social Rights shows that poorly managed recession, followed by a series of austerity budgets with a lack of social participation and a reliance on regressive cuts to spending over progressive tax reforms undermines basic rights. And the people who are most affected are people like women and children, people like the elderly, and also people with a disability. Now, I want to acknowledge Deputy Finian McGrath's work, his lifetime commitment and his voice for people with disabilities. And I noticed that he called for a senior minister with a dedicated responsibility for disability. Some weeks ago, I had a similar request with the Taoiseach for a dedicated minister in relation to alcohol and drugs issues, or at least a junior minister whose sole remit that would have been. And while I went through the list of the new junior ministers today, and I don't doubt that I'm sure there are reasons for each of those jobs, I just wondered where was the minister, notwithstanding your own work, especially in relation to mental health, who's dedicated to vulnerable communities and vulnerable groups. Now, when the 8 topics were chosen for the Constitutional Convention, myself and others were disappointed that human rights were not included there, and particularly rights for people with both mental and physical disabilities, because we know the difficulties that those people face and the difficulties for those who love them and who care for them. So we would be looking for, a commitment to equality for those people, and that there would be no additional stresses on them. But instead of that, over the past few years, we saw the stresses, whether it was around home help, personal assistance provision, community care, respite, special needs assistance, or resource hours. And we know the number of parents who had to go to court to get basic rights for their children, whether it's education or health or care. And you think about the amount of money that was spent in court on that when it could have gone to much better use. And then last week, those 26 organisations supporting people with disabilities had their funding cut, with a total loss of 1.2 million annually, which is not a huge amount when you consider the work that they do and the people that they reach. I know the work of the Irish Deaf Society. I had a topical issue on their particular cut. I know the silent world of the deaf community and the need for a voice for people. The post-polio support group, again, this is a group I know, and they are a group who were totally left behind when so many other groups with a disability were looked after. Centre for Independent Living, people with a disability, and that funding cut, and the Alzheimer's Society, and they all affect just maybe small numbers of people. And you have to ask, well, what sort of a message or a signal is that giving to those people with disabilities? Now, your amendment says that you're committed to facilitating the full inclusion of people with disabilities in the life of the community, and yet those organisations which facilitated that have had their funding cut. One other group whom I know very well is the INMDA, because of my own friendship with somebody who battled motor neuron for a number of years, and there were 2 members of the Dáil who had motor neuron. And I've taken part in a number of fundraising events. I even went on a catwalk for the fashion show. So we're doing the fundraising for this organisation, and then on the other hand the government takes that funding from them. It's just completely illogical. And 11 neurological organisations, and they were all turned down. Now, if there were issues with any of those organisations, surely those issues could have been brought to their attention, so something could be done about it before it got to the stage where their funding is cut, the service is undermined, and some people have lost jobs. We know that 1/3 of people with a disability have emotional, psychological and a mental health disability. And 87% of those with mental health condition have at least one other disability. And of course that is the whole need and the stress for integrated services. And I just want to finally come back to another area, and this is in the area of dual diagnosis, which I have brought up here before. And that's people with a mental health issue, people who are in addiction also, and people who are homeless. And I suppose the point I'm making now and then was the need for an integrated service for those people, because what happens is there'll be an agency to deal with each aspect instead of one agency that can deal with all of those. And another further group within that group are people in prison, and people who come out of prison with a mental health issue. They come out maybe still in addiction or coping with recovery, and they're homeless. And that's, small amount of spending at that stage will prevent further spending at a later stage. Thank you.